Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Back in December, the week before Christmas this past year, you might remember that there was sort of a freaking debacle in a Washington, D.C. federal courtroom. Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn showed up in court to be sentenced by a federal judge. And when he got there, Flynn appeared to be in good spirits. And that was understandable. Prosecutors had filed a public-facing document that praised him for his cooperation since he pled guilty. Prosecutors said, yes, Mike Flynn committed and pled guilty to very serious crimes. But once he got caught, he pled guilty right away. He cooperated substantially with prosecutors on multiple cases and investigations. And prosecutors told the judge that they wanted the judge in the Flynn case to take into account when sentencing him what a good cooperator Mike Flynn had been. So when Flynn showed up in court that day in December, you could understand why he was a little buoyant, right? Everything was going to go great. This was finally all going to be behind him. It did not go great. The judge at one point during that sentencing in mid-December told Mike Flynn, quote, "I'm not going to hide my disgust, my disdain." That was right before the judge asked one of the prosecutors standing there in the courtroom whether he had assessed whether Flynn's actions actually might rise to the level of treason. The prosecutor said in response, effectively, hamana, 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 hamana. The judge later walked that back, but he didn't walk it back that much. This judge said to Flynn in the courtroom that day, he pointed to the American flag in the corner of his courtroom and he said to Flynn, "Arguably, this undermines everything this flag over here stands for." He told Flynn, quote, "Arguably, you sold your country out." And that went on for a while. And ultimately, Flynn finally did get the message, the very unsubtle message from the judge that maybe that would not be the best day to go through with the sentencing. Maybe it might be better to come back a different day, see if there was any help that Flynn could maybe provide to anyone else, if there was any other investigations Flynn might possibly contribute to help his country. The one with that flag there in the corner of the courtroom. Try to help the cause of justice in some way. Maybe try again in a few months. That was in December. Now, Mike Flynn's case is not scheduled to be back in court until the middle of next month. That's when the next status report is due in his case. All the more surprising, that made it all the more surprising today when we got a whole new bunch of stuff from Flynn's case unsealed by that judge without warning. And it's interesting, this doesn't seem to be related to any forthcoming proceeding relating to Flynn. It doesn't seem to be driven by something else going on in Flynn's case. This stuff just popped onto the public docket today by order of that judge. And one of the items that we got for the first time today is the previously sealed documents that prosecutors had filed with the judge in Flynn's case in advance of that doomed sentencing proceeding back in December. Prosecutors had filed a public-facing document, which is the one that said Flynn was a great cooperator. You should give him credit for that, Judge. That public-facing document didn't spell out much about what Flynn had cooperated about. They saved that for this sealed document, this document that was sealed until today, which does spell out in detail exactly what Flynn helped with, exactly what investigations Flynn cooperated in. And so now that it's been unsealed today, surprise, we're seeing that for the first time. You can see up there at the top, it's described as under seal and ex parte, but those are struck out. They're struck out because as of today, this is no longer under seal. It's been released. It's been posted publicly. So now we can see it. Quote, "This addendum to the government's memorandum in aid of sentencing describes the significance and usefulness of defendant Michael T. Flynn's assistance to the government and the timeliness of that assistance. As described herein, the defendant's assistance to the government was substantial and merits consideration at sentencing. Quote, "The defendant has assisted with several ongoing investigations. Number one, a criminal investigation in the Eastern District of Virginia that is likely to result in criminal charges. More on that in a second. Number two, the Special Counsel's Office investigation concerning any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald J. Trump." And then the next line down is presumably the third thing that Mike Flynn helped with, maybe? The next part after the comma there, he helped with this Eastern District of Virginia criminal case, comma, Special Counsel's Office investigation, comma, and then redacted, redacted, redacted. But this new document does go on to describe at least for the parts of it that aren't still redacted. It describes the assistance that Flynn provided in pretty good detail. It spells out, for example, that criminal investigation in the Eastern District of Virginia is the case that ultimately did result in criminal charges against Flynn's former business partner, a Trump transition official named Bijan Kian. Kian, you may remember, is charged with acting illegally as an unregistered foreign agent in this country while he was working for Flynn and also while he was working on the Trump transition, doing little unimportant tiddlywinks tasks like, say, helping pick out the CIA director. Bijan Kian has pled not guilty. That case is ongoing in the Eastern District of Virginia. But prosecutors in Flynn's case gave Flynn big props for how much he helped in the Kian case. Quote, according to prosecutors in Eastern District of Virginia and the National Security Division at the Justice Department, defendant Flynn's cooperation and assistance have been critical to their investigation in the Bijan Kian case. And then there's another big redacted chunk. The EDVA and National Security Division prosecutors have interviewed the defendant. Redacted, 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 redacted. So that's how they deal with the Bijan Kian case. The second case where they say Flynn helped is the special counsel's investigation. And this is sort of fascinating. This is new, at least in this form, this is new. Quote, the defendant has also assisted with the special counsel's investigation concerning links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. Defendant Flynn has assisted the special counsel's investigation on a range of issues, including interactions between individuals in the presidential transition team and Russia, discussions within the Trump campaign about WikiLeaks releasing emails, and potential efforts to interfere with the special counsel's investigation. And then they break it down. Quote, defendant Flynn provided firsthand information about the content and context of interactions between the transition team and Russian government officials. For example, after the election, defendant Flynn communicated with the Russian ambassador as a representative of the transition team on two sensitive matters: a UN Security Council vote on a resolution calling for Israel to cease settlement activities in the Palestinian territory, and the Obama administration's imposition of sanctions and other measures on Russia for interfering in the 2016 election. Quote, several senior members of the Trump transition team publicly released false information conveyed to them by defendant Flynn about communications between him and the Russian ambassador regarding the sanctions. Flynn provided details on which transition team officials he conferred with before communicating with the Russian ambassador. Also, who on the transition team was aware those communications were occurring. Also, who on the transition team was informed about what he discussed with the Russian ambassador. So it's really interesting to get all that detail. I mean, we know from the context here, and we know what we can see in the Mueller report, that contact between the Russian government and the Trump transition team about sanctions, that was one of dozens of contacts between the Russian government and Trump world during the campaign and during the transition. That, in fact, was one of the contacts with the Russian government that all the Trump people lied about. Well, now we know one of the ways Mike Flynn cooperated with prosecutors was by telling them who knew the truth about his secret contacts with the Russian government while he and everybody else in the Trump transition was lying about those contacts. This new filing from prosecutors also says that Flynn helped them investigate WikiLeaks and how the Russians released the material that they stole from the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign in their effort to help Trump win the election. Quote, defendant Flynn also provided useful information concerning discussions within the campaign about WikiLeaks' release of email. WikiLeaks is an important subject of the special counsel's investigation because a Russian intelligence service used WikiLeaks to release emails the intelligence service stole during the 2016 presidential campaign. Defendant Flynn relayed to the government statements made in 2016 by senior Trump campaign officials about WikiLeaks, to which only a select few people were privy. Meaning, they got stuff from Flynn about how the Trump campaign was talking about WikiLeaks, and it was information they probably couldn't have gotten otherwise had Flynn not told them about it. Quote, for example, defendant recalled conversations with senior Trump campaign officials after the release of John Podesta's emails, during which the prospect of reaching out to WikiLeaks was discussed. So what we're getting here, again, for the first time, this has never been unsealed before. We get Flynn helping with the Bijan Keon prosecution, which is ongoing. We get Flynn helping with all the lying about the transition team talking to the Russian government. We get Flynn helping with the Trump campaign and their enthusiasm for the Russian efforts to help them during the campaign, and the Trump campaign's efforts to reach out in response to what Russia was doing to help them. But then, remember, the other big volume of Mueller's report, the whole second half of Mueller's report was about obstruction of justice. And now we know that Flynn was helpful there, too. Quote, defendant Flynn also assisted the special counsel's investigation into potential efforts to interfere with or otherwise obstruct its investigation. Defendant Flynn informed the government of multiple instances, both before and after his guilty plea, where either he or his attorney received communications from persons connected to the administration or Congress, that could have affected both his willingness to cooperate and the completeness of that cooperation. The defendant even provided a voicemail recording of one such communication. In some of these instances, the special counsel was unaware of the outreach until being alerted to it by the defendant. So, before and after Mike Flynn pled guilty, people connected to the Trump administration and also people connected to Congress? Who's that? They were reaching out to Mike Flynn to talk to him about what exactly he planned to tell prosecutors and whether he planned to cooperate with them and how much and on what topics. We know that one of those instances of outreach from persons connected to the Trump administration was what's referenced as the voicemail here, which we think is probably the same reference from Mueller's report about a lawyer for the president, the quote, president's personal counsel, leaving Mike Flynn a voicemail. This is amazing. So right after Flynn withdrew from his joint defense agreement with the White House, which was a signal he was about to plead guilty, it was also a very strong signal he was about to start cooperating with prosecutors, right after he pulled out of that joint defense agreement, Mike Flynn got a call. And this is, in the Mueller report, this is sort of a particularly mafia-esque episode in Mueller's report. I mean, this is literally the part where Flynn is about to cooperate, right? He pulls out of the joint defense agreement. It's pretty clear he's about to plead guilty. He's about to start cooperating. And he, in the dead of night, gets the warning from the president's goon squad, letting Mike Flynn know that if he's thinking about cooperating, you know what, Mike? Here's what you might want to keep in mind. I mean, this is from the Mueller report. Quote, in late November 2017, Flynn began to cooperate with this office, meaning with Mueller's prosecutors. Quote, on November 22nd, Flynn withdrew from the joint defense agreement he'd had with the president. Flynn's counsel told the president's personal counsel and counsel for the White House that Flynn could no longer have confidential communications with the White House or the president. Later that night, the president's personal counsel left a voicemail for Flynn's lawyer that said this: I understand your situation, but let me see if I can't state it in starker terms. Wouldn't surprise me if you've gone on to make a deal with the government. If there's information that implicates the president, then we've got a national security issue. So, you know, we need some kind of heads up just for the sake of protecting all our interests. Remember what we've always said about the president and his feelings toward Flynn. And that still remains. The following day, November 23rd, Flynn's attorney returned the call from the president's personal counsel to acknowledge receipt of the voicemail. Flynn's attorneys reiterated that they were no longer in a position to share information under any sort of privilege, meaning, hey, we are out of this joint defense agreement, we can't talk to you anymore, and anything you say to us from here on out, we can't keep it secret. Quote, according to Flynn's attorneys, the president's personal counsel was indignant and vocal in his disagreement. Quote, the president's personal counsel said that he interpreted what they said to him as a reflection of Flynn's hostility to the president, and that he planned to inform his client, the president, of that interpretation. Flynn's attorneys understood that statement to be an attempt to make them reconsider their position. Yeah, you think? Did you look down to see if your kneecaps were still in the front? Nevertheless, on December 1st, so a week later, Flynn, in fact, pled guilty. And when he turned up in court to plead guilty, then everybody officially knew that he was cooperating with prosecutors, with the special counsel, whereupon almost immediately the president changed his tune to start publicly dangling a potential presidential pardon for Mike Flynn. I mean, we knew some of that from the Mueller report. We now, as of tonight, know the other side of it from a description of Flynn's cooperation that was just unsealed by this federal court today. And, I mean, just a little personal aside here. How is the president not being impeached for obstruction of justice right now? I mean, that episode alone. I realize there's a lot of equities involved in terms of whether or not the president's going to be impeached for stuff like this. But this is the president's personal counsel calling up Flynn and being like, might be a national security issue if you'd said anything about the president. You know how much the president likes you. Wouldn't want me to tell him that you turned hostile on him, would you? I'm going to go ahead and tell him. I'm going to tell him you've become hostile to him if you go ahead and cooperate. You sure you want to cooperate? I mean, this is like the stuff that gets cut out of a B movie because it's a little too ham-handed in terms of explaining to the audience how this particular crime family does its business. You sure you want to cooperate? Oh, you're going to go ahead and cooperate? Well, I'm going to tell my client about your hostility to him. You sure you... This was made public today. Soon thereafter, we got another brief order from the judge in Flynn's case after he ordered the unsealing of this stuff. He soon thereafter ordered the prosecutors to also file on the public docket the full transcript of that voicemail recording that Flynn handed over to prosecutors, that voicemail that is described in part in the Mueller report. The prosecutors are ordered to hand over transcripts of that voicemail. They're also ordered to hand over transcripts of Flynn's conversations with the Russian government. Those are going to be on the public docket. And the judge himself has told prosecutors that he doesn't want just the transcripts himself. He wants both the transcripts and the actual audio recordings of both Flynn talking to the Russian government and the president's goon squad calling up Flynn and threatening him to not cooperate. The judge wants the audio versions of both of those recordings delivered to him on a DVD in chambers by the end of this month. What? Now, I don't know if that means we, the public, will ever get to hear the actual audio recordings, but we definitely are going to get the full transcripts. And then, oh, wait, there's more, because that was followed immediately by another short order from this judge. And this one, I had to read backwards and forwards a few times before I would believe my lying eyes. I sort of can't believe the judge just did this, but he did. And I think this is a huge deal, and I'll have that order for you next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.